Morning everyone, welcome to the Council meeting of the 2nd of October 2024. This meeting will be recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube. We have our health and safety requirements for the Council chamber. In the case of a fire and emergency, on hearing the alarm, please leave the site immediately by the nearest fire exit. Vacate to the assembly area, which is the clock tower on Te Maraeohine. The square. Health and safety, smoking and vaping is prohibited within any council public entrance, building or site. A defibrillator is located outside the entrance to customer services on the ground floor. And please report any near miss or incidents to the committee administrator. Those who are online, and greetings to Councillor Michelad, to keep their cameras turned on and microphones muted unless addressing the meeting. And if attending online and someone wants to send a text for an amendment, this should be emailed to the committee administrators. For those who are presenting, can you please give your name before speaking and use the microphone? And I'm just going to ask Councillor Zabellin if she could open our meeting with a karakia. Thank you, Councillor Zabellin.
Morena tātou, me enoi tātou. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauritu, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, huie,
Taiki. Tēnā koe, Councillor. We have apologies from the Mayor. He's absent on council business, Councillor Wood, and also Councillor Billy Meehan. Item number 3. Oh, sorry, I'd like to seek I'll move that, a seconder for that. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Can we please vote on that? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Number 3, creation of additional items. We have 2. The review of delegations to the JC Trust Travelling Fellowships, and also the Civic Honours Awards 2024, which are confidential and be in part 2. And the reason for the lateness for both are highlighted there. Thank you. I move to receive those items. Thank you, Councillor Denison. And may I ask that we take a vote on that? Thank you. Thank you. Pass unanimously. Declarations of interest. I have a declaration of interest for item number 10 and also item number 20, which will be in part 2. Any other declarations of interest? Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Just to note that I'm on the JC selection panel. I don't see a conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any public comments? Might help if I look at the screen. Oh yes, Councillor Harpiter.
Also, just a note that I'm on the appointment panel for the CEDA on item number 8. Just to note that.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Ka pai. I'd like to, oh. Councillor
Thank you,
Dennison.
Chair. With the theme of declarations of being on these panels, I was also on the panel for the CEDA appointments and the appointments to council-controlled organisations, but I don't see that conflict in my deliberations.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to request that we make a recommendation that Councillor Vaughan Dennison be appointed as chair for item 10. Thank you. Councillor Naylor seconds that. Any comment? Can I please ask we vote? Thank you. Thank you. That's been passed 12-1 and 1 abstention. Thank you. Now moving on to, there is no public comment. However, we're moving on to confirmation of the minutes from September the 4th. Part 1, public to be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those. Second, Councillor Johnson. Any discussion? If not, can I please ask that we vote on that? Thank you. And guess what? I'm just going to turn a certain phone off because every time Councillor Orfei pushes a button, it comes up on my phone. So excuse me for a second. And that's not blaming you, Councillor Orfei, that's me. Kia ora. With regards to recommendations from committee meetings, Rangitani o Manawatu Committee Part 1 Public, the meeting was held on the 11th of September, and the report will be presented by Kathy. That's what we did. So I'm moving the recommendations, thank you. That the council establish a program steering group to provide oversight of Te Motu o Poutoa Cliff Road Development Program. And 2, that the council agree that the draft terms of reference of Te Motu o Poutoa Steering Group attachment 2. Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Is that part of the minutes that we've just approved?
Through you, Madam Chair, this is the recommendations from committee that we'd usually take at the end of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
We're bringing them forward today because we've got 2 items that need these to have been agreed by the council before we action later in the meeting.
All right, thank you for explaining that. So these are items 16 and 17?
That's correct.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
So I'm happy to move those, seconded by Councillor Dennison. Oh, Councillor Naylor, thank you. And comment?
Madam Chair, I just, this probably does highlight a point of process that I'll decline to second this, but when we come to item 9, perhaps I will declare the interest being the nominated candidate for this appointment.
Thank you, Councillor Ngā mihi. So with no further comment, may I please ask that we vote? And that has passed 13 votes, unanimous. Thank you. Now moving on to the Economic Growth Committee, Part 1, Public, of the 18th of September. Thank you, Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you. I'd like to move the, am I doing part 1 and part 2? Just part, recommendations that are outlined on page 83 of our paper. If I could move that we receive those to this committee, which are outlined above. Do you want me to read the whole recommendations? Okay, that the council lodge a submission to, is that what we're reading? Yep, that,
Yes,
no, sorry, I'm really
that
confused.
lodges motion.
That we just, that we are moving the 5124, that we're receiving those recommendations. Yep, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Arnott.
Councillor Arnott, I had two. Very good. Thank you. Any discussion? Can I please ask that we vote on that? Thank you. And that is passed 12 votes. Moving on to transport funding implications, 2024. And can I please invite Glenn O'Connor, Manager of Transport and Development, and Scott Manser, Manager Finance, and James McGill, Senior Transport Planner, forward. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for the introduction, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. Just take a bit of time this morning to talk through a bit of background about the report we have in front of us on transport funding, and it will be a bit of a tag team between myself and my colleagues. Council's transport funding is largely through the Regional Land Transport Plan, which is a government-directed plan that's put out, or the government policy statement is put out every 3 years, and it allocates, the government policy statement allocates transport funding to the government's priorities. The current GPS was put out in the middle of this calendar year, and it had a strong focus on economic growth, increased maintenance and resilience, safety and value for money. So they were the four key priorities. The GPS had a fairly heavy rewrite and was published. The final GPS was published a lot later than typical, so that did slow things down a bit. One of the things that NZTA does with its funding is allocates each council a funding assistance rate. So that's the rate that NZTA subsidises or fund each council, and our rate is currently 51%. So typically half of what we do gets a subsidy where applicable from NZTA. Sometimes those subsidies are a bit higher if there's an increased FAR for certain things, and occasionally the subsidy is a bit lower. But for our main maintenance, operations and renewal activity that we undertake that is subsidised, we get 51% subsidised. During its LTP, Council settled on a funding application to NZTA for around about $130 million for the 3-year 24 to 27 period, and with assumptions of co-funding in that. Of those assumed $130 million worth of subsidisable, so subsidisable by NZTA programs, it was confirmed a few weeks ago that in fact Council received about 56 million. So we applied for 130 million and we received about 56 million. So in rough numbers, we received about 43% of what we asked for across the application. So what does that mean? How does that get broken down? Council received just about everything it asked for in the two categories that mainly make up our maintenance, operations, renewals of our road network. The aptly called pothole prevention class, which is focusing on resealing of our sealed roads, drainage repairs, so keeping the water off our roads, rehabilitations where we repair roads such as Railway Road as we're doing at the moment. Council received what it asked for essentially in that activity class from NZTA. The local road operations, which is the mowing, the street lights, the line marking, the maintenance really. We got almost what we asked for. We got about 400,000 per year in round numbers less. So really, really good results. Big increase, and that was reflective of council's desire, the community's desire to increase sealing on our roads, for argument's sake, as one example. So as far as funding goes, there was no real surprises in those two activity classes. For walking and cycling, and to recap, walking and cycling is our footpath network, our shared path network, our cycle lane shared path on road or off road. Had been well signalled that the funding may not be quite so forthcoming in that activity class. The reality was we got 22% of what we asked for, so 22%. Wasn't unexpected, but certainly still a pretty harsh cut in the funding. But we're not alone. Those three examples that I talked of, those activity classes are fairly similar across our local region and across New Zealand. I suspect we're middle of the road as far as funding goes. For capital new, so that's where we do new things. Either we change the alignments of our roads, we fill in dips as we want to do. In some areas, we adapt our roads from where they've gone from a sort of rural road to a more urban, dense road. We want to widen them. For where we do safety improvements, we put roundabouts in, where we've put in the past raised tables, where we've done upgrades, which we call here at Council capital new, or shorthand CapEx new. With the exception of Ambliab Bridge, we received 2.3 million. We received nothing, so there was no new, and that was a surprise to I think most of us in my role, my colleagues across the traps. Again, that was fairly similar right across our local region and in effect across New Zealand. So that is a big deal. The major upgrades that we do, that we plan for, that we'll be designing, and maybe two that are on the top of my mind are Stony Creek Road and Kilvin Grove Road. We haven't got funding in this long-term plan to do that, or co-funding from NZTA. So what does that mean? How does that impact us? What it means is that we need to divert more share of our pothole maintenance money, more share of our patching money, from where we got a really good increase. Instead of looking forward to those two roads I've talked, rebuilding them over the next 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years, we'll have to have another strategy and decide how we're going to manage those roads. So whilst we got some really good increases in funding in some areas, other areas are pretty tough. Likewise, we didn't get any funding for business cases. So the ring road that my colleague here has been working to me, James, the ring road business case, we didn't get any immediate funding for that. The next section I want to talk to, so that's the NZTA funding. The second part of this paper is what I've labelled emissions from Council's long-term plan. During reviewing this budget, during reviewing the long-term plan, during reviewing these changes, it became clear that there's some emissions in our long-term plan, transport emissions, where we haven't secured the funding that we need to deliver the level of service we expect. And some of these emissions are important for our transport network. The emissions total for the current year that we're in, around $2.3 million for operating and around 0.9 million for capital renewals, and that's the current year that we're in. There was similar emissions which carried on forward into the years 2 and 3 of the long-term plan. So that's a bit of a summary about the transport funding and the long-term plan. I'll just hand over to my colleague Scott.
Cool, thanks Glenn. Morning e tātou. So obviously this provides quite a challenge in terms of council's financial budgets for funding some of the shortfall depending on the direction we receive today. So we're really trying to seek a bit of direction from elected members about which parts of the transport program that you would like us to focus on. And we'll go away and model that, which I'll come back to shortly. There's three really main options for elected members here. We've talked about the 3-year funding program that Glenn's just sort of run through the highlights of. We have a more pressing issue for the current year, but then we can feed some information into the annual budget process for year 2 and 3 when appropriate. So the three really main options that council has is we could fund the shortfall through rates and loans. Now we can't do that in the current year because we've already set and struck the rates this year, but we can feed that into next year's budgets. So this year the option is really agreeing an overspend and a council deficit, which will in turn be funded by additional debt. Based on the prioritisation that can occur here. The programs that didn't receive council co-funding from NZTA, particularly the capital new ones, council could elect not to do those programs. As 51% is a substantial share of that money, so we could not fund those programs and delay and defer that work. That will bring pressure on to some of the operational budgets in regards particularly to potholes and rehabs of our roads. We could also top up council's local share funding. We have 49% for some of those programs this year. We could choose to fully fund the work that we wanted to do in this current year and in the future years as well. Conversely, we could reprioritise some of the transport budgets amongst the different transport activities and go for the highest, most urgent, the safety priority works and put our money in there and then effectively have an ordered list of where we can go to once we get through those fundings. One thing I do need to highlight, and you'll remember from our long-term plan conversations, our debt headroom is rather close in years 4, 5 and 6. This is going to cause quite a problem in that space in regards to the capital program. The strategy in the long-term plan was that we worked through the capital program which generated rates revenue in the following years to repay the interest and debt repayment of that capital program. With a smaller capital program that will therefore reduce the rates requirement in the following years and have a bit of a compounding effect due to the 250% ratio. So that's something that I need to flag and will bring back through as part of the modelling. I don't and won't have the answers right here right now for what that will mean. It will depend on the programs that we push forward and what that will mean through there. So we'll consider that as part of the modelling that we'll bring back next month. I do just have to alert elected members to a slight wording change in one of our recommendations. In the rush last week and in our final review of the paper, I incorrectly added in some wording into recommendation EI. So I'm wondering if we can just bring that up on the screen and show the revised wording which removes and renewal emissions of 0.9 million from that resolution. The 1.7 million that's talked about includes the renewal emissions there. So I'll happily take any questions on that, but that one was my error through a bit of a rush and a final review last week. It got incorrectly added to that resolution. I'll pass back to Glenn for a little bit more about those.
Okay, just want to talk through a bit of the background on the recommendations. Recommendation 2A talks about council delivering the local road pothole activity class, and again that's resurfacing, drainage, rehabilitations, etc., and local road operations, maintenance and operations of the roading network. We talk about to the NZTA funded level, and just getting a steer from councillor, just a recommendation that we actually deliver those to the funded level. It's very close to what we asked, and gives us a reasonably expected level of service. The recommendation 2B is a tough one, and that's council delivers the walking and cycling activity class, and again that's footpaths, cycleways, shared paths, to the NZTA funded level. And want to note that's only 22% of what we asked for. So that would be really keeping the assets in just a safe condition, the absolute bare bones maintenance, and making sure that the network was safe. It's a tough recommendation, that one. Recommendation 2C talks about capital works to the NZTA funded level, which entails delivering Amberley Bridge, and we were very fortunate to get the Amberley Bridge money. One that we have picked out specifically is recommendation 2D, and I just want to talk about why we've picked that recommendation 2D out, and that's about the Manawatu Regional Freight Ring Road. And we picked that out because officers believe it's important to keep that business case going. That business case will be the one that eventually unlocks the ability to move the big heavy trucks off our network onto a more purpose-built road, the Tremaine Aves, the railway roads, that sort of area. And again, we have picked out one particular project, but wanted to highlight the importance of that from an officer level. So that's why that has its standalone recommendation. Maybe to labour that point, it would be very easy to lose momentum on that ring road business case, and whilst funding is tight at the moment for those sort of jobs, it will come of age, it will come with time, and there will be available money from our co-funders at some stage. So again, wanted to pick that one out quite heavily. We've talked about the emissions, the recommendation E, and there's different options there. So I'll let council debate and talk those ones through.
Can I just jump in there? Thank you, officers. Just to advise the elected members that Glenn is referring to 1D when he's referring to items. It's not 2, but at 1D and so forth. Thank you.
Cool. And just finally, sort of to wrap up our introduction of the paper. So as part of the next steps, take the guidance from council today around where they would like the priority put on the transport program. We'll be able to take that away and complete the modelling of any impacts in regards to proposed debt for the year, and start to flow that into the annual budget for 25-26 as well. And then through a paper that we'll bring back to the next council meeting on the 6th of November, we'll write the recommendations for not only the current year, but also at that meeting will be the proposed capital program for the 25-26 budget as well. So we'll be able to factor in the proposals around the transport budget and amongst the wider capital program for priority as well. And where any projects that have significant public interest, and I think the one Glenn mentioned before around Kelvin Grove and Stony Creek roads, we'll work to put some communications out to the public as well. As we all know, those two roads tend to generate quite a lot of public interest as well. So we'll wrap that piece in as well as when we come back to the 6th of November meeting. So I think that'll open us up for any questions from the floor.
Thank you very much, officers, and we move into questions. Councillor Johnson, thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Glenn, Scott and James. Okay. First question is around the emissions. Were the emissions included in the proposal to NZTA, or have we potentially missed out on some co-funding because of the emissions?
We have potentially missed out on some co-fundings because of the emissions. for some of the things, how much we would have got of that co-funding, we won't know because of the cutbacks.
Okay. In terms of the walking and cycling budget, where you said we've got 22%, that's 22% of the 3-year budget, isn't it? So how much of this year's budget have we got? Are you able to tell us that?
Last regional land transport plan, so the 3 years from 2021 to 2024, in round numbers, we got about 4 million for walking and cycling, in round numbers. This 3-year period we've just entered, we've got about $2.3 million.
Okay, that isn't perhaps the answer to the question that I was hoping to get. So if we look at the 3-year period, you've told us that we've only got 22% of the budget that we've asked for. But in terms of just focusing on this current financial year, is it still only 22% of this year's budget, or is it perhaps more or less of this year's budget? Because the 22% evens out over the 3 years.
Excellent question. And I'll broaden that to the whole transport activity, if I may. Typically, the first year of the 3-year transport funding tranche, there's a heavy focus on designing. Typically, you design in year 1 or early in year 1, and that sets you up for construction in years 2 and 3. Some of the renewals work we're doing still needs a bit of design work. But get back to cycling, we had, from memory, about $3 million. I want to say this year for the cycling activity, walking activity, and we've got funded for just let's call it $1 million. So we're about 2 million short this year. Okay.
And so not all of that is maintenance then. Some of it is design for renewals. Is that right?
The lion's share of it is for maintenance, but there will be some design for some renewals.
Okay. Right, so moving on to the capital new, you said at the start that the government priorities were around growth. So how does that tie in with us not getting funding for capital new projects? Because those are the ones that support growth.
Oh, I couldn't possibly enter into that debate. Leave that for others.
Okay. There's an inconsistency there, but we'll leave that to comment. Okay. In terms of, Scott, your comments around E1, that you had changed the recommendation, can you just explain that a little bit more broadly? So the recommendation that we have is reallocating council's local share funding and debt funding the remaining operational emissions of circa 1.7 million and renewal emissions of 0.9 million. So you've taken that out of number 1. So can you explain what that's about?
Yeah, absolutely. The reallocation that we propose in Table 2 takes into account the renewal budget's reallocation as well. So we don't need to debt fund the renewal piece over and above the reallocated funds. So the 1.7 is all inclusive of operating and renewal reallocation.
Okay, so it's not that we're not doing that, it's included in the 1.7.
Correct, yep. And that was my error in that resolution too. Apologies.
Okay. I'll leave it at that for now, Madam Chair. I might come back in later with some more. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions mostly relate to the emissions and the recommendations in 1E. When I came on council, the financial orientation included the call that capital new can be funded through debt, but renewals and operational costs should be always funded, rates funded. And it was explained to us that debt funding OPEX is like borrowing to pay the groceries. Can you confirm that that is the case? And if that is correct, just wanting to understand Office's view of the Office's recommendation in the report that suggests that we debt fund the operational emissions and renewal emissions?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You're correct in that capital funding is debt funded. Operationally, we try not to debt fund it. There is one exception, and that is related to our digital work and software. Due to a change in accounting standards, that has become operational expenditure, but we receive the benefit of those software systems for multiple years. So that's the only exception in the operational space that we try and do that. In regards to this resolution, we have already struck and begun receiving rates for the current year. We can't re-rate for that. So without any money coming in from NZTA or any other sources, we have very little option but to recognise a deficit, and any deficits are therefore debt funded, because there is no other funding source for council. Having said that, if council was in a surplus at the end of the year, that would then go on to repaying that debt ahead of that time. So that's specific to this financial year only. Officers and the SLT team ahead of the annual budget will be looking at how we can factor in some of those emissions that are critical for Glen's budgets across the wider council budgets, and just what options we have there, and we'll come back as part of that process as well.
Thank you. In terms of the emissions that have been identified in the on page 19, in the roading area, or across the transport space, have there been any other emissions identified across other budgets, or is it just simply in the transport space?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. So just understanding your comment around the exception for OPEX, debt funding OPEX being around the digital space, our year one LTP figures outline 11.1 million of operating expenditure to be debt funded on page 181 of our LTP. Is that all digital, or is there capital, are there operational funds for salaries as well?
The figure on page 181 refers to the renewal program and the 3-year rolling average. Because we rate a renewal program over 3 years, being the 2 preceding years and the year of the renewal program, due to the change in the renewal budgets as we reset the LTP, we were commencing some work this year that didn't have the previous 2 years of funding. So that nets out over the life of the long-term plan. So the debt funding is used to cover the gap between the 3-year average and the renewal budgets there. The digital budgets aren't all of that 11 million. And in regards to your other question around debt funding staff, those aren't included in that particular budgets. They are included in the capital new budget. So we set a capital new budget, and a portion of that is staff time, which we fund. Also, having said that, staff time is predominantly in our renewal budgets rather than our capital new.
Okay.
As a line share, but there are some staff time in capital new budgets as well. Okay,
thank you. So is it correct to understand that 11.1 operational being debt funded and is quite a lot more than normal?
Yes. You'll remember that we've just gone through significant ERP program.
Yeah.
That's the predominant share there,
Okay.
As well as a couple of other strategic platforms for digital.
Okay, thank you. The resolution in June to authorise borrowing of 54 million, if we were to proceed with E1 or 2, would that borrowing have to be more than 54 million?
We would have to see how council's financials are tracking through the year. So I think the intent behind that resolution is that we'll if there is any available money to redirect into these budgets, we'll look to do that first. Having said that, if we needed to look at that resolution around the dollar value that Steve goes through the Treasury, then yeah, may have to look at that as well.
Okay, and I think this is my final question, Chair. In terms of the issue that was raised with if we spend less capital new, the impact on year 2 and 3, in terms of the fact that year 2 is the only year in our LTP that we exceed the limits in terms of our rates increase, of our policy limits, would that actually be a good thing in terms of our ability to perhaps operate within our financial policy limits?
Specifically in regards to the rating percentage, that would help that factor. It will exacerbate the problem in years 4, 5 and 6 of our LTP where the debt headroom is at its smallest, and you'll remember the prioritisation piece that we did around smoothing the capital program and reducing and moving around to make that work. That could potentially exacerbate that problem. Unfortunately, I don't have any answers to hand on what that would look like. We'd have to go away and model that and bring that piece back.
And those costs in year 4, 5 and 6 that you refer to, is that still a little bit undetermined in terms of the fact that we're looking at different models for how we fund that?
No, that's as we agreed in the LTP with the proposed capital program and the proposed level of operational revenue coming in to create that debt capacity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Sabellin, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. My questions relate to the CapEx programs that are listed in attachment 2. I've just had a really good read of them and their program profiles, and there's a few questions, but I think they're really quick and straightforward. So my first one is about program 1121, which is about the Food HQ Massey Tenant Drive pedestrian upgrade, and I wanted to know specifically, are we looking at addressing the area where the pedestrians do walk on the shoulder, or is there a specific project that we're planning to progress under that program?
Thank you, Councillor. Rather than giving an incorrect answer, I'd rather come back to you with a clarification on that, please.
Right. Thank you very much. Other questions about the Kelvin Grove and Stony Creek roads. There's a few programs there. I noted that the Whakarongo intersection notes that it's also part of a larger program, the Whakarongo Growth Program. Is there an impact to that larger program if this project doesn't go ahead as planned?
The very short answer is yes, there is. The detail is a lot more complex because we wouldn't want to upgrade certain areas and push transport onto a roundabout, for argument's sake, that wasn't there or wasn't sufficiently capable of doing what the road had been designed for.
Sure, thank you. For the Stony Creek road upgrade, that's 2335. I think that's got 500k in it for year 1. Is that's prepping work, I presume? That's preparation and design?
Yes, correct. Enabling works, design, consultation, if there's any consenting, those sort of type jobs. Certainly from an officer's point of view, we'd be recommending that we continue with some design work in year 1. Stony Creek, Kelvin Grove are top of the mind. Otherwise we lose momentum, we lose time, and whilst it's getting late in the season this year, we're looking for year 2 and year 3 to do any physical works on those type of projects.
Great. Thank you. And there's a couple of programs there for bus shelters. I noticed one of them was for the removal of decommissioned bus shelters. Are there any leftover elements from our Transport Choices work? How many more have we got to go?
Great question, and yes, there are some leftover elements of our Transport Choices. We've actually got some bus shelters in stock, and the November paper will be intending to bring back a resolution to enable some of those at least to get up, and we'll install those over the next year or 2.
Okay, thank you. And there's also an additional budget line there for, just trying to find that, about $500,000 for this year for new bus shelters. Do we have more new bus shelters that we need to install?
Yes, and sorry if I wasn't clear, that's what I was referencing in my earlier comments.
Great, thank you. And my other question relates to the village roads upgrade, which is also on the non-funded list, and it specifically excludes Bunnythorpe. And that was, again, planning money in year one. Who would be missing out if we didn't progress?
We had some work in I want to say Dixon and Dutton Street from memory, and I might stand to be corrected there with some design work for some upgrade. Likewise with my comments on the bus shelter. For the next paper we bring back, we'll bring back some recommendations, and a reasonably modest amount of money can ensure that we've got some quite good results from that money. But we'll detail that in the paper.
Thank you. In regards to emergency reinstatements, is my understanding we would be 100% funding any emergency road repairs from storm-related events going forward?
It is our intent to claim subsidy from NZTA for the emergency works that we've had, the reinstatement works. We'd be hopeful that we get a substantial co-share from our co-funder NZTA, and but it's something that's almost literally going on now. The team's preparing an estimate for NZTA, our funders, so we can confirm that cost. But certainly the expectation is when we have out of the ordinary storms, and they don't necessarily need to be emergency events. I fall into the habit of calling them that, but they can be storms like we had in August and September that are cumulative. We would expect a co-share from our partners at NZTA.
Great, thank you. There's one there that's a program for improving drainage capacity on roads. That's about 120k a year. What do we have a plan of attack there for which streets we might be planning to tackle first?
Yeah, the specific budget for 120,000 is more reactive, where we just need to go in and do something for a whole raft of different reasons. Certainly the major jobs like Stony Creek again or Kilton Grove, the drainage improvements are part of that road. For the likes of the 120,000, it might be something where our team sees a pretty big impact can be made with a relatively small amount of money across a number of sites.
Thank you. Last one, street racing. We've got 60k a year. Do we have a proactive list for what we're tackling first with those treatments, or are we being more reactive? What could we expect to do for 60k a year in street racer prevention?
Sadly, it's quite reactive, and maybe I'll describe it as whack-a-mole. We do something in one place and it pops up in another place, to use a non-technical term. But a lot of that money is cleaning up after the events and dealing with the aftermath.
Sure. And that's all from me. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Llewellyn. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Glenn and officers, for the report. A few questions. Around 1E and the emissions, could you just summarize for us some of the impact if we were to not fund those?
Some of the impacts would be to our line marking. Our lines on our roads wouldn't be as clear as what they could or should be. Our green cycle box markings that we typically see at intersections where cycles park again aren't as clear as what they could or should be, so they're not remarked as often. Our streetlights may not be replaced as quickly as we want or would hope. We talked earlier about road drainage. We'd have more water on our roads, or our seal, our pavements and our surfacing would or could fail a bit quicker. One that I do want to point out is Bike Ready, a relatively small program that has, in my view, quite big benefits that would only be half funded. The other big one that I need to pull out is sweeping. That there'd be a reduced level in sweeping, and I probably use sweeping in its broadest terms. I should say cleansing and sweeping and road drainage. So our sump removals, our sump clearances, our proactive maintenance wouldn't be as good as what we'd expect.
Thanks. I guess I'm hoping to understand that kind of a step further in terms of impacts around safety, around flooding of the street network, those kind of things. So that's what I'm interested in getting to. Like, what kind of impacts would we be expecting there if we go with zero budget?
Pretty much as you described. We could expect more. We could expect more surface ponding to become flooding where our drainage system isn't functioning in our streets. Our roads wouldn't be as safe as what they need to be for line marking, and our streets wouldn't be as lit as what we need them to be for a safety point of view. Would be the short answer, councillor.
Thank you. Could I just then understand a little bit of the difference between 1E1 and 1E2?
Thank you for the question. 1E1 proposes that we reallocate some of the current budgets that we have, and effectively prioritising those emissions over other works. 1E2 is funding the emissions in their entirety and still doing the full program that we've agreed and budgeted for in the LTP.
Thanks. So either way, all the emissions get funded. It's just in one we rob Peter to pay Paul, and in the other one we borrow a bit more. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful to understand. Footpath renewals. I'm not sure exactly where that sits within the different recommendations, but how much footpath renewal did we get through last year? And as things stand now, how much could we expect to do this year?
Specifically for the path renewals, I'm sorry, I haven't got that on the top of my mind, or in fact in my notes. Path renewals this year, we could expect to do almost none, and that would be under walking and cycling, because we would be just prioritising the urgent stuff we need to do. Where we could expect to go and do a whole street. We wouldn't be doing that under the current 22% funding. I'm looking around for a nod, and if I get a nod, I'll have a figure for you.
Thank you. If we were of a mind to do something about that, is that included in already included in recommendations on screen, or is there, is that something that needs to come up out of an appendix?
The recommendation that catches that is the recommendation to do with walking and cycling, where we only fund to the 22% provided by specifically pick out something such as footpath renewals. That would be a standalone, or path renewals. That'd be a standalone recommendation or direction to officers to bring something back.
And so, if we, given the state of preparedness here, given the state of preparedness here, if we put some direction around bring something back in November, or could we expect that something is already on the way in November around footpath renewals?
For clarity, if we could get some directions, that would be very helpful, because this is very complex, and knowing what is the council's priority is required. Not that the options are unlimited for us to bring things back, but they're certainly complex and vast, so clear direction, please.
Understood, thank you. Business cases you indicated around the Ring Road, and obviously there's a recommendation there. The City Centre Transport Hub, where are we up to a business case there?
So in terms of our co-funding, we received co-funding for the City Centre Hub. That was funds that was rolled over from the previous NLTP period, so that is not affected by the funding decision.
It's almost like a silver lining on a cloud. Final question, Madam Chair. Just around the comms plan that was indicated in 7.4. Just interested to know, I guess, to what extent that comms is going to be clear about some of the causes of the trouble that we're in.
Good morning. I'm Olivia, Comms Manager. Excuse me. We are going to do a brief update publicly today, just following the meeting, but I guess the more beefier bit will come in November once you've made some decisions with some of those clear outcomes. But yes, we will need to be attributing why those changes are happening, and that will be a clear key message in any comms we put out.
Thanks. Will there be some more information in the November report around giving us a sense of that comms plan?
Yeah, we can put the full comms plan in that.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in regards to the recommendations in E, if council was of a view not to go through with the debt funding of the emissions, option 3, EI, or the triple I, being 3, seems a little bit clunky and unclear. Would a recommendation in the vein of providing options for the CE to report back and provide options to prioritise the operational and renewal budgets to keep within the approved budgets for year 1, would that be somewhat acceptable as a proposition to move forward at this stage?
It would be, and we'll take direction from the room. I would caution that our budgets are likely to be quite tight this financial year. We're already experiencing some of the same pressures as previous, particularly in our utility space. Not a lot of available funds, the other budgets, to the value that we need to look to here. So, I mean, we absolutely can, but I would just caution that there could be some implications on other service levels that council provides in that regard if that resolution was passed.
And that could come back on the 6th of November reporting, though, for us to ultimately make the final decisions on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Councillor Hapita.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm on page 24, attachment 2, just following on from Councillor Zabellin. Just with Stony Creek Road and Kelvin Grove Road, both of those are to do with safety, and I just want to ask the question, how many accidents have been held on those two roads, and we were going to improve them because of safety. So if we can have an answer to how many accidents have been on that road, those two roads.
We'll confirm back on that council. We don't have that information.
Can we also, in the back, how many traffic movements are on both those two roads?
Certainly.
That's important. And the third thing is, how many traffic movements are on Cliff Road?
We'll bring that back in the report also.
I think that'd be really important. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hapita. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be about the comms plan. It's more about the shape of our LTP, actually. So with what's in front of us today, our transport programme, which is a huge part of our programme, now bears no resemblance to what we consulted on in the LTP. So my question is, what are the implications of that? Does that expose us to any risk? We're often told when we go out for consultation that we can't then choose something that would have substantially changed the submissions that we got, and this would have substantially changed the submissions. So what is our exposure here?
Thank you. I'll ask the CE to comment on that.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have actually had this conversation as well about whether or not it might trigger SCP or going back out for consultation. At the moment, it isn't significant, but we don't believe it's significant enough for us to have to reconsult or redo our LTPs. There's a conversation that's actually happening right across the local government sector at the moment. No one's suggesting that we're needing to kind of go back out and redo consultation to a great extent on it. However, as you know, here we do consult each year on our annual plan anyway, so no doubt we'll obtain community feedback about a change in priorities in the program.
Thanks, Wade, that's helpful. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry to come back in again, but need to get a clear understanding of what this is going to be. So back to E. When it talks about E1, reallocating council's local share funding, is that the local share funding that we had budgeted for projects that haven't now got co-funding?
Yes.
So in table 2, for example, sorry, just wait till I get it up again, just to pull something out of, attachment 2, I beg your pardon. So for example, if we took, say, street trees, new and replacements, where we got no co-funding, our local share funding is 100,000 over the 3 years. So is that the fund that you would then reallocate to the emissions? I'm just not understanding, sorry.
No, that's an excellent question. Table in the paper has a line at the bottom which is capital new local available of 0.9 million.
What is that? Yeah.
The street trees funding local share for this current year would be included in that 4.9 million there, and would have to get a council resolution to reallocate that capital money into the operating budget, because we can't do that under CE delegation.
Okay, so is that the sort of thing that's going to be coming back to us in November, so we can see exactly what money has been taken from where? Because I'm a bit nervous to approve some of these recommendations when we actually don't know clearly what budgets we're going to be robbing to do what.
Yeah, so the E resolution is predominantly around the operating and capital renewals reallocation, there totaling the 1.7 million. That's a lot easier to move between the two because, as Glenn's talked about, the flavour of what we're doing is just slightly different, but largely the same, whereas the capital new programs we would absolutely bring back as part of the November 6 paper.
But in terms of the operating and renewal programs, how will we know which programs are going to have the local share used and therefore not go ahead, or go ahead to a much lesser degree?
We will detail it in the paper we bring back to council.
Okay. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Sorry. Glenn?
If I may, Madam Chair, just wanted to confirm the earlier question around footpath renewals. We spent 1.1 million in footpath renewals in the year we just finished. So footpath renewals 1.1 million last year.
Thank you, officers, for presenting this. It is indeed quite complex. And Councillor Dennison, I do have a mover for these. We're going to take them given the complexity, one at a time. And Councillor Dennison, could you please? And it's seconded by Councillor Naylor. Thank you.
Okay. First I'd like to speak. Yeah, that's what I wasn't clear.
Yes, sorry, apologies. Councillor Dennison will be presenting this. The recommendation 1A. Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Naylor. Wow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move 1 and 1A, is it? What you wanted to say? 1A, basically. Thank you. Look for a seconder if we're doing them one by one.
Councillor Naylor, seconder. Any comments? Oh, could we please vote on that? Thank you. One A. And that is passed unanimously. Thank you. With regards to 1B, the recommendation, and I have a mover for that. 4I, sorry, BI.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move BI in the terms that are in our papers and before us on the screen.
Councillor Naylor has indicated that she will second that. So now I'd like to invite comments from Councillor Barrett. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll firstly note that things are suddenly incredibly fast in a way that's a little bit uncertain to some of us around the table, and I just ask if we could just slow things down a little bit and understand where things are coming from and perhaps a bit more around why. My comment here in principle is that, you know, an incredibly challenging recommendation to face for our community, not only in terms of some of the new work that we had envisaged to make sure that we had a better balanced transport system, but in terms of some of the just fixing things that have been broken for a very long time. And that most notably is our footpath network, where we hear about it consistently, every single annual budget, et cetera, that things are not up to standard, that people are tripping, suffering injury, not getting to go, et cetera, simply because we haven't actually kept up the basics of a footpath. And I'm disappointed to hear that we would be going from a pretty decent 1.1 million last year to nothing. I don't think that's consistent with where this community wants to go in terms of ensuring that we do have a well-maintained and walkable footpath network. So I'd indicate that I would like to move an additional recommendation that we see 1.1 million for footpath renewals be included in our annual budget FY 25, and would ask for a seconder on that. Appears that we do have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So really this is just about making sure that we
Excuse me, Councillor Barrett, sorry, could you, I was just speaking with the administrator, could you please just repeat that again? Thank you.
Yeah, so I was midway through drafting something out, but in brief, that we would like to see $1.1 million provided for footpath renewal in annual budget 25.
Thank you for repeating that, and sorry, apologies for interrupting
That's all right,
you.
thank you. Probably leave it there on that for now,
Yes.
thank you.
I'm just going to take a pause for a minute, everyone. I just want to seek some advice on this, Kia ora, so please feel free just to have a brief conversation. Kia ora everyone, welcome back. Good to have a little pause there, and certainly we realise that this is very challenging and complex. However, we will continue to debate what is on the table, and should this fail, then we will be looking at Councillor Barrett's amendment, alternative, should I say, and regarding 1.1 million for the pathways. So if we could carry on, thank you. And we have moved on point. So comments on this one, thank you. Any comments? Councillor Johnson.
Okay, this is a very complicated paper, and it's quite confronting, I think. But the fact that we don't like it shouldn't mean that we lose sight of what we're trying to do for the city and of what the community wants and needs. And so for that reason, I'm not going to be supporting B, because I just can't imagine leaving this chamber today and going out and talking to any citizen in the community and saying, we decided to put in money for footpath maintenance for a year. I mean, quite honestly, if you're not prepared to support putting in money for footpaths, I don't think that the electorate will want to have you back around the council table. It's as simple as that. Councillor Naylor spoke before about not having money for groceries, borrowing money to eat. Well, quite honestly, if you don't have any food, you have to borrow money to eat, otherwise you starve. And that's the situation that we're in. We don't have the money for footpaths. We don't have it from NZTA as we expected, quite reasonably, I might add, that we might have. We haven't rated for it. There's no other alternative but to borrow it, unless you want to be not doing other projects. And given, as the officer said, that the budget is so tight this year, just to remind you, elected members, of the days and days we spent around the council table pruning the budget back to be as tight as we could possibly get it. We're not going to find, was it 1.7 million? We're not going to find 1.7 million of savings in that budget. That's unrealistic. I know it's very attractive to say, oh, we'll vote this through and we'll do a Hail Mary pass to the CE and we'll hope that, by the end of the year, it'll all work out, but it won't. It absolutely won't. And there's no way at all that I am going to support not spending money on footpath maintenance. And I would urge you all to consider very carefully your position on this, because if the community is to hear that there are councillors sitting around this table that think we shouldn't be spending money on footpath maintenance, then I think they'll be very disappointed. So please, vote this down and let's go to the alternative of B2 with the footpath budget in.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving on, Councillor Naylor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, I just want to say how disappointing it is that we haven't attracted the co-funding from Waka Kotahi that we presumed when we consulted on our long-term plan. Given that really disappointing and challenging situation, what this paper, I understand, is asking us is to give officers some general direction so that they can come back in November with some more specifics around what that might look like. B1, which is what I've seconded, that has been moved, is in line with officers' recommendation to us. It doesn't mean that I'm not interested in funding footpaths. It means that I'm interested in supporting what was approved through our year one of our long-term plan budget, supporting the funding that we consulted on with our community, and not necessarily presuming that our community will fund what we presumed that Waka Kotahi would fund. So it's really important to look at page 21, colleagues, at the next steps. This is to inform the modelling that will be completed and come back to us in November. It is then that we can be well informed about what that might look like and make some decisions. What I heard from our community through those submissions a few months back was that we need to live within our means and not to add more debt. So before we go adding further costs, which is what I understand the alternate recommendation is, I think we need to follow through on what we consulted our community in terms of how much they needed to contribute to these transport budgets. Yes, it's disappointing, and yes, it's challenging. Those next steps also outline that the officers will work through the impacts of funding and service level implications as a part of our annual plan process for next year. Next year is the time that we go back to our community and have that conversation with them when we look at year 2 of our annual budget, given the information we now have from Waka Kotahi. So on that basis, I'm happy to approve this recommendation that officers have recommended in this paper to enable that information to come back in November.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. None of us wanted to be here, that's for sure. I just want to say that first, that this isn't about not attracting co-funding from NZTA. This is about NZTA delivering the government's GPS. We can't attract funding that isn't available to be attracted. So it's not about NZTA, let's be really clear about that. I was reading something earlier this week, which I thought was pertinent, knowing we were coming to this conversation, which described the word consultation as a portmanteau word at the moment between and insult. And that's really where we are with what we talk to our community on. Yes, there's an element of when we talk to our community, we're certainly asking them if they approve us funding those activities. But I think, well, I'd be very surprised if many of our community are alive to the nuances of the far right and the NZTA funding and the government's policy statement. What we're really asking them about is, what do they want us to do? And if we'd gone out and said, do you only want us to do 22% of our footpaths, I think we'd have had some very different submissions. So yeah, on that basis, I'm not supporting B, 1B here, and we'll look to see what the alternative recommendation is.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zabellan.
Ngā mihi, Madam Chair. I also will support the alternative rather than this. I agree that it is what it is, and we've got to face it. And I agree with Councillor Naylor that staff are looking for a steer or some general direction for us. So here is some general direction for me. I just cannot in good conscience go out to a community and say we're going to spend $17 million this year on a shiny new Arena 5 and we're going to leave our footpaths to rot when 42% of our footpath network is currently rated average. So with nil investment over 1 or 3 years, we are absolutely going to be going backwards from where we are. Can't brook that. I really, really strongly want to have us at least put some budget in for footpath renewals as part of the general steer to the staff, so that we can see what that looks like with a basic provision for a basic service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Finlay.
I'm just trying to think what would have happened if at the long-term plan we'd said that we were not going to fund any footpath maintenance this year. How many submissions do you think we would have had? We would have had several hundred more than we got. There is no way the people of this city are going to sit back and say, we're satisfied with our footpaths. Because I tell you, they're not. I've got several cases where members of Grey Power have fallen over and have been badly hurt. One lady with a walker, the whole side of her face was ripped open because she came across a pothole in a footpath. And we're thinking about not keeping up the maintenance. Well, I'm sorry, we haven't kept up the maintenance already. And you're going to make it worse? I'm sorry, I can't support this. We're going to have to find $1.1 million. We're going to have to find $1.1 million. The people in this city do not deserve to be treated as substandard people. They're entitled to footpaths they can walk on. And if we consider not carrying on with it, well, I think as Councillor Johnson said, I think a few of us not be here this time next year, because footpaths are one of the biggest things we need in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will support B1, and the reasons why is because I don't want to have to put the rates up or have to change the funding system, because that's what it will do if we go with the alternative. It will change the way in which we have to do that, and that's what it will put an extra tax on our ratepayers, and that's what the consequence will be. And I think that's the whole way in which the alternative will be funded. It'll be putting the rate up or putting extra costs on everybody. So that's what we've got to look at, the consequences of this. And I think that's the whole point. If you want to put extra rates up, that's what this will be. So that's why I will stick with B1, because I don't want to put the extra rates on everybody. So that's me.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
I'll take this as the right reply. Thank you, Madam Chair. Very sympathetic to the concerns that have been expressed around the footpaths and the needs around just keeping our asset management across the city. And do acknowledge this is a core service, so no doubt about it. I think the timing of the NZTA decision is really unfortunate when we've not that long ago decided on our LTP, and then they come and tell us that we've underfunded the co-funding element of these projects to the tune of these sort of differentials is quite astounding, actually. And I do take Councillor Bowen's point that this is the GPS of the government that's been executed. So I think that's a fair point made. However, to keep pace, that does require a figure, which is, I'm not sure if that's got any relevance to actually keeping up with our asset renewals in that footpath activity. But my general premise is still the same, and it's like Councillor Harpeta's mentioned around the debt servicing that this council's facing. Again, on balance, if we had this knowledge when we made the LTP, I think we would have included a figure of that sort of sum included in the budget, and maybe reprioritise some of the other things that we included that maybe were outside the transport activity. What we're looking at here is solely the transport activity, which is a little bit challenging, and we know that we could have rebalanced it across a wider spectrum. So that's the general state of play. I do have, I'm sympathetic to what's been achieved, what's trying to be achieved here. But actually, when we look at what the external Audit New Zealand said in its report of our current LTP, they cautioned around its fundability. They cautioned around its doability, and actually we're only one of two councils that were in that category across the country. And so that brings concern around that we've loaded our plan with financial requirements, and many of them were pingent on third party, and this one of course has been one NZTA. This now sets quite a different scene, and I'm kind of speaking to all the other recommendations that are before us too, to be fair. And the idea to come forward of just increasing another 1.1 million. A rough rule of thumb, $1 million borrowed over a 20-year period at say 4% is an extra 420,000 the city will be servicing that cost with for every million. And we've loaded up with tons of millions already. And so I'm just very cautious of kind of stretching the boundary fence on including more in our planning at this stage without having a full review at our quarterly report to find out how things are tracking. I'd rather have the knowledge of when the report comes back next month around where things sit. And also understanding that there's some omissions here that we also need to acknowledge how we deal with those, that they are important activities for us to execute for safety. And yet, you know, where does that sit? I guess Councillor Johnson did mention, we did try and cramp it down. But when we're looking at the transport budget, I think we need to just prove a discipline here, and hence why I'm still promoting the recommendation that I moved, which was the 1B, isn't it? And so I'll leave it for the vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dennison. We have the recommendation there, and we will be voting on that the council deliver services for the walking and cycling class activity class. Includes footpaths, cycleways and shared path as funded by NZTA, noting that this is an expenditure reduction of 78% of what was agreed in the long-term plan 2024 to 34 and would provide a very basic level of service. Moved by Councillor Dennison and seconded by Councillor Naylor. I request that we all vote on that. Thank you. Failed, 9 against and 4 for. And therefore, we will move to the alternative. And I invite Councillor Barrett to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues, for your support on this. It feels like we've mostly had, so won't recover all the territory that we have, but just reflect on the fact that many of us were at the Local Government New Zealand conference, or read some of the headlines out of that conference where we were told to do the basics by the Prime Minister. I don't know what world he lives in if he doesn't think that footpaths are basic, but let's get real. In this community, footpaths are basic and they're going to happen.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor Naylor, thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm just wanting some clarity in terms of this recommendation, whether that's for year one or the first 3 years, whether it's renewal, capital new or operational, because it does seem to exceed the budgets that are already in there. So perhaps we need some better clarity before making a decision.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor, and I'm going to ask the CE to provide comment on that. Thank you.
Through Chair, as I understand it from the conversation, it's talking about year one, the current year we're in.
And so can I just clarify how much of an increase this would be on our year one of budget? Year one, is it renewal or capital new or operational?
That's a renewal budget.
Renewal budget for footpaths renewal, so it's 1.15 in year one. So is this 1.1? So does this increase our year one budget as outlined in our LTP then?
That's not my understanding what this resolution is trying to achieve. It's saying we will do the walking and cycling activity class as funded by NZTA at 22% plus the 1.1 million for footpaths renewals.
And how much is the 22% cover for footpath renewals?
Not very much, a couple of 100K for potholes in the footpaths.
So the 1.15 budget that we've got in there, would this resolution increase it or just maintain it?
Maintain it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So sorry, Councillor Naylor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In speaking to this alternate, I won't be supporting this. I actually think that the B2 in the paper is a preferable process in terms of prioritising certain projects from attachment 2, the funding allocation and deferring others to reallocate council's local share funding. I think given that B1 has been not successful, I think the preferable process going forward would be to allocate the existing funding rather than this is picking one thing and determining the funding without that broader understanding of the information and the implications that we'll get back in November. And from a process point of view, I think we're better to make this decision once we've got all that information. So if this actually failed, I would be happy to support B2 as outlined in our agenda.
Can I just add in there that this is to direct the officers to go away and look at this and then come back to us with something more definitive for us to consider. Councillor Johnson, thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to clarify that officers asked us for direction over which projects we would want to prioritise. So if we go for B2, on its own, it doesn't help officers to know which projects from attachment 2 we think should be prioritised. So the aim of this recommendation is to provide a clear direction to officers about the programme that we think should be prioritised. B2 doesn't give sufficient information for officers and would require an amendment to give that information anyway. So I don't see that there's any advantage in going for B2 in the circumstances. This recommendation provides clear direction to officers and makes it clear to the community that whatever the government decides about co-funding, if the government chooses to prioritise roads of national significance to suck up all of the land transport budget, that's up to them. But we in this community will be prioritising the services that are important to our community, and in this case, footpaths. So I think we just need to be very clear in the direction we're giving to officers, what we consider to be the priorities, and then that enables them to bring something back to us next month with the implications. So I'd urge you to support this. I think from the previous vote, most of you do understand how important footpaths are to this community.
Thank you, Councillor. And now over to Councillor Dennison. Thank you. Right reply?
Yeah, I think.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not my right to reply.
No.
Speaking on this recommendation before us now, I am sympathetic, and I take the point that this is going to come back to us next month, and I believe we do need to take a little bit of a wider view. I think the quarterly report through the finance will be an interesting element, as I mentioned before. I think we need to come out wider, actually, of the holistic view of the council expenditure, not just drill down necessarily on transport, because we've acknowledged there's some pressure on it, notwithstanding the emissions point that I'll come up with again later, and work out on a more broader view around what are the projects that we've included for funding that are pingent on third party, because I believe there's still pressure in the community to attract some of that third party for different projects as far as a contribution. And that would also maybe defer some of those other aspirations we set at the time when we confirmed the LTP. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Right of reply, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, colleagues. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you, colleagues, for the comments, and to staff for the clarification as we are moving quickly, but hopefully now clearly forward here. You know, this is actually pretty simple. It's just about doing the basics. And as I've said, there are a few things more basic in this community than making sure that we get our footpath network up to scratch. This overall budget area is already down 78%, you know, so it's kind of how much more blood do you want out of a stone? I think we're far better to actually put a little bit of money against where we need, where we know some of the greatest need and demand is in the community. So to urge your support here and continued support in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. And we are going to vote on this recommendation that the Council deliver services for the walking and cycling activity class, includes footpath, cycleways and shared path, by funding 1.1 million for footpaths in year 1, in addition to funding secured from NZTA. Moved by Councillor Barrett and seconded by Councillor Johnson. Can I please ask that we vote? And that is passed, 12 votes to 1 against. And I'm going to call a morning tea break, and we will return at 5 to 11. Thank you, everyone. Tēnā koutou. Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing with item number 7, and we're currently looking at number C, that the council deliver capital new works, upgrades and new assessments. Now, of course, we realise that we've only been given funding for the Amberley Ave Bridge funding or project. However, we're going to go with the officer's recommendation and discuss that, but I am aware that there is an alternative should that fail. So, CI. One of the recommendations, but I do have a mover for CI and a seconder. Do I have a seconder for CI? Fails for the lack of a. That's fine. That's good. So now, Councillor Zabellan, thank you. If you'd like to speak to your recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to move this recommendation that Council deliver capital new works, upgrades and new assets to prioritise the following capital new programs in year 1. That's program 159 Kelvin Grove Safety, which is the 5 DIPs. That's budgeted for $1 million in year 1. For program 2335, the Stony Creek Road Safety Intersection, which is near Whakarongo School, which is budgeted for $500,000 in year 1. And program 1804, Citywide Road Drainage, which is $120K for year 1. The reason that I wanted to move these is because I went through and read every single program profile of each one of the capital new projects that was identified in attachment 2. And I asked quite a few questions to make sure that I deprioritised the right ones. And I am reasonably satisfied that we can defer most of attachment 2 without catastrophe in most cases. These 3 cases in particular have very compelling cases for us to continue to work on them in year 1. We were going to pay for 49% of these works anyway, and they are long overdue, highly, highly unsafe road environments. We've just got to get onto it. These roads have terrible safety ratings. They have high crash prediction rates, high crash rates. There was a crash there just last week outside with a member of the school community, and the locals keep telling us that they've given up on us ever doing anything about it. I have quite a few comments to that effect, but someone commented they've been living in this property on that road for 21 years and have watched it go on and off our agendas, and we haven't actually made any progress. So now is the time to do that. With Project 1804, the Citywide Road Drainage, that is a program to improve our drainage capacity to reduce flooding risk to properties, such as increasing stormwater culverts. It's $120,000 a year, and given what we've been seeing lately with the increasing need for this activity, with that surface flooding in places like Andrews Ave, Linton Street, people's backyards, I think a cut here would be really unwise and short-sighted. We would no longer be able to respond to those kinds of events effectively. So I can live with most of attachment 2 being shelved for the time being. I've read all these risk assessments, and these are the 3 exceptions where I don't think that the risk of deferral is worth it. Our community out there is counting on us to make some progress or just make a start on this, and we have made a bit of a start. It's really important that we keep going. I also absolutely believe we will need to tough even more at annual budget time, and we will need to get more ruthless with our prioritising, because our community will not accept, and nor do they deserve actually, a roading situation that is going backwards. So we will need to take a really, really big look across the whole program, in my opinion. So please, I'd hope you can support us to progress these projects specifically in year 1, but defer the rest for annual budget discussions. Welcome your comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Zabellan. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've just got a question to the mover first, and then I'll have a comment.
Certainly.
By putting this forward, My calculation might be wrong, is that we've got 37 million of local share budgeted. So this is not going to use up the 37 million of local share. So are you anticipating that the rest of that local share would just not be spent? Or because you haven't moved either 2 or 3 or 4, I'm not clear what you're expecting to happen apart from the priority of these projects. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do. There should be another part of that recommendation which states, and defer the balance of attachment to NZTA funding allocation to the annual budget process.
Okay, thank you.
That's my intention, that we'll deal with the rest of them together at a later date.
All right, well, I'll speak to that then. Look, while I support the prioritisation of these projects, I don't support deferring the balance of the capital new programmes, because we've already budgeted 49% of the capital new. That's in our budget right now. What I would prefer that we do is to prioritise within that 49% and defer what's left. And I think that my understanding would be that would be option 3, 3 in this particular one, by prioritising certain projects and deferring others. Or would it be number 2 as funded by NZTA? No, I think it would be 3. If I can just get some confirmation on that from someone.
Thank you. I'll look to the officers to reply.
Sorry, can we just repeat that question?
Okay. We have got 49%, whatever it is, of the budget budgeted for capital new. Most of that has not been funded, only Amberley Avenue has been funded. The balance in our budget, which of those recommendations would describe using that balance on what capital new projects we can afford ourselves? Is that clear?
Yes, that would be 3.
Okay. All right. So then in that case, I'm not going to support this one, because not that I don't support these projects being prioritised, I absolutely do, and I think they're worthy and valuable projects, but I don't want to defer the balance of the capital new programmes. I think it would be better that we prioritise the money that we ourselves have budgeted for capital new, so that the community gets the maximum benefit from capital new projects. Some capital new projects are also quite important to us, Kiki Whenua projects, and so on. So what I would prefer, and I'll signal that I'll move it if this were to fail, is that we go to option 3 in this particular set of recommendations and identify these 3 projects as priorities. So is that clear? I don't know. It's a confusing process, I know. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay. I could amend, but in the interest of fairness, I will just leave it, because I think it is actually a separate thing. So, just to be really clear, what I support is us using the budget that we have already set aside to prioritise projects up to the value of the budget that we have ourselves in capital new. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. A little bit confused on what Councillor Johnson has said, but I'm trying to understand it. But anyway, I'm very happy to second that with Councillor Zabellin, and that was gone with my questioning that I did to officers before. I've been on council for 4 terms and have seen Kelvin Grove Road and Stony Creek Road on there for 4 terms, and I don't want to see that. I didn't support the last recommendation because I knew this one was coming up, and that's why I didn't support the last one, because I support this one, and I can't keep supporting everyone coming up, but I do support this one for that reason. So that's why I've supported this recommendation. We've only got one pie, and it can't go as big as it can. So that's why I support this, and I will support it going forward. Thank you, Councillor Zabellin, for putting this up.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. So I might start with questions given the nature of discussion so far. If we were to vote this down and then seek to reattach these 3 projects to C3, would we be in trouble, or could we take that approach?
Over to one of the officers, thank you. To the CE, thank you.
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, that's totally doable. Yeah, you wouldn't be in trouble.
And, thank you. And would we further need in 3 to then specify, to Councillor Johnson's comment, would we further need in 3 to specify the overall sum that we are seeking to retrieve from the local share that we've already funded?
I'll just check with the team. My thoughts are is that as part of that prioritisation, we would need to bring that back to you as well anyway. So you could then sort out the funding aspects of it at that point in time.
Okay, great. Thank you for those responses, which leads me to indicate that I'll be probably disappointing my colleague and some other colleagues by choosing to vote this particular version of this down, which is where it seems like we've gotten to in terms of process. But what I would hope is that in doing that, there would be somebody to move. I'm happy to second 3 then, provided we can see these at the top of the list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just have a question of clarification for a start. Just in terms of looking at attachment 2, the amount applied for NZTA funding for the first program, 159, it was 18.5 million, and the second was 8,300,000. But that's quite different to the LTP budget amount. So I'm just wondering why we've applied for such 18.5 million when the LTP budget says 3 million on the first one, and the second one 8.5 million. And I can't, and the other question was I can't seem to see program 1804 in that attachment. So I just wondered what the full allocation or funding for that program is.
Thank you, officers. Can I have a response?
Yeah, in regards to the first question, the timing of when we apply to NZTA funding does not align with when council sets the LTP budgets. So we applied for funding in November, December, whereas we didn't set the LTP budgets until late June. And you'll recall through hearings and deliberations, there were quite some substantial changes to what was proposed and what was applied for to NZTA. In regards to the second question, I think some of your colleagues have answered that it's on the second page of that attachment.
Thank you. So if we're looking at the full value of those first 2 programs, it's 3 million and 8.5 million. Yeah. Okay. I'll just quickly move to comment. I do have some reservations about us making this call because that's 11.6 million that we presume that we had indicated to our community that would be co-funded. If we now propose that to be fully supported, we're asking our community for an additional $5.8 million that we haven't consulted on. It may well be the highest priority of our community, but I would prefer to defer it to next year's conversation with our community where we can look at it all as a whole. So I won't be supporting this, but perhaps for a different reason to some of my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Barrett and I are on very similar lines here. I'm very happy to support the prioritisation of those 3 programmes, and the first 2 in particular. We were just commenting at morning tea that the Kelvin Grove Safety 5 DIPS programme might have got further if we'd called it the Kelvin Grove Safety 5 Enormous Potholes programme. But I'm not happy with deferring the balance into next year's annual budget. We know what our local share is, so I'll vote against this one with a view to allocating the local share in a prioritisation programme that comes back to us in November, highlighting these 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comment? Councillor Sabellin, right of reply, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Yes, I also would be happy with an alternative. So we'll see how that works. And also just to make the point that this recommendation is specifically looking at one, and that the balance of those projects would be dealt with in due course, and that there isn't any additionality here. This is just prioritising within which we've already got. But as it is, I would be happy with either outcome. So we'll leave that to the vote. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Zabellin, and we are going to vote on that now. Thank you. And that has been lost, 8 for and 5 against. Thank you. Now we go to the alternative, and that is coming up. Councillor Johnson will be speaking to that. Was Brent?
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Councillor Johnson will speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Zabellin would like to second it, not Councillor Barrett. Yeah. Can I just see what's actually written, please, so I can be sure that it's what I want to say? Thank you. Okay, maybe we could just have the words after local share funding, including but not limited to, words beloved of educators. Yeah, okay. So, right, I'll be clear this time, Councillor Hopperter. Apologies for confusion earlier. This is not asking for any more money from the community than what we've already consulted on. In fact, what this is doing is using the budget that we have consulted on, that we said that we would provide to deliver the maximum that we can deliver in terms of capital new, given that we haven't got co-funding from NZTA. So the first thing I want to say is that I think it's highly inconsistent with the government's MPS on transport that these growth programmes have not been funded through the NZTA allocation. Highly inconsistent. I can't really explain why that is. The officers didn't want to venture an opinion. But it does leave us in a difficult position. We need to be able to fund some growth projects to enable the continued economic development of the city. And in particular, to service new housing, new industrial development and so on. So I'm very keen that we just make the most of the budget that we have already consulted on with the public and do what we can within that budget. So it's not asking for a cent more, but what it is saying is, look, we didn't get the co-funding. We aren't going to be able to do everything that we said we would do, but within that, we will prioritise. And Councillor Zabellin has clearly identified 3 priorities. There may be others as well, but we'll wait for the paper to come back from council staff to see what other priorities we might be able to accommodate within the budget that we have. So I'd ask for your support on this. It's really important that we don't pull the plug on new capital growth projects for the city. It would have a huge economic impact, and we need to make the best of a bad job, as they say, and do what we can with the budget that we've already allocated. So I would ask for your support. It's a reprioritisation. It's not new money. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have anyone else waiting to Councillor Barrett. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a question that just indicates the that is working today. But I see this is silent on Amberley Ave. So could I understand from members how they would interpret Amberley Ave?
Through you, Madam Chair, where we talk about by prioritising NZTA's funding allocation, that's with regards to Amberley Bridge, because NZTA funded that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Indeed, a good question. So I would like to call for a vote on this. Thank you. And that has passed unanimously. Thank you very much. We're moving on to 1D now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
councillor
you, Madam
Dennison.
Chair. I'd like to move DI, which is that Council deliver the Manawatu Regional Freight Ring Road business case by reallocating Council's local share funding in 24-25.
And that is seconded by councillor Naylor. Any comments? Thank you, councillor Barrett.
Question either for the mover or officers. Where's that money coming from? If it's being reallocated.
Through you, Madam Chair, that'll come through unallocated council share.
So I guess I'm trying to get at what won't be done if we end up funding it by reallocation rather than by additional debt.
As its operational expenditure, as its operational in nature, we'll reallocate some of the unused OPEX expenditure, council local share. So that's likely to be from walking or cycling.
Thank you for that further point of clarification. I think that gives me an indication. You haven't really had a chance to introduce yet, other than to move it. Okay. Thank you for that brief negotiation across the table. Yeah, so having heard particularly that this would come at the cost of the already severely cut walking and cycling budgets, I'd be quite opposed to the idea of doing that, and think that for the 100,000 would be far better to look for an additional debt funding. Absolutely think this is, you know, obviously a key project for the city, but again, blood out of a stone. We've already taken a 78% hit across walking and cycling, albeit with a little bit of reinstatement. It would be unfortunate to come after it again for 100,000 here, where we have a simple option to debt fund. So I would urge colleagues to vote against this, and I would indicate that I'd be happy to move D2 should this fail.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm really happy to support this that's been moved by Councillor Dennison. It's about getting the trucks out of the main route and putting them onto a ring road, and that's what the business case is all about. It's about getting the trucks off our main road. So that's what the ring road is about. That's what the business case will be about. It's about economic development, and it's about doing that for our city. So that's what this case will be about, and that's what we'll see in the business case. And I think we've had that conversation, and that's what we need to see in this business case. So I'd urge you to support that. If the Mayor was here, he'd urge you to support that as well. So I hope you do support it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Okay, so to be clear, this is not about whether or not we support the Manawatu Freight Road, Ring Road business case. This is about where the money comes from to pay for it. So I do support us doing the business case. I don't support us reallocating council's local share funding to do it. So I won't be supporting this, but I will be supporting to do this by additional debt funding. So I think we probably all agree that it's important to have the business case done. And I don't think that's the argument here. The argument is, where does the money come from? I'm very unkeen to take it from the allocation of council's local share to walking and cycling, for reasons that Councillor Barrett has already outlined. In terms of additional debt funding, we're having this conversation kind of in isolation from the main annual budget that we've got. And certainly over morning tea, there were some conversations around actually what we may well be able to do at the next quarterly financial report is to take another look at the whole budget and reprioritise some budgets to pay for some of this, what is appearing today like additional borrowing, but may in fact enable us to stay within the borrowing that we've agreed for the financial year that we're in. So although at the moment it's written down as additional debt funding of 100k, I really think that what it would be in effect is just, it will be prioritising that particular funding rather than some other thing that's in the budget. So I want you to bear that in mind when we're debating this particular item, but also items to come. There in this paper, it's described as additional debt funding. That's what it is at this moment in time, but we may well, and I would anticipate we will, be able to, when we next look at the quarterly financial report, determine prioritisation and move budgets around so that instead of it being additional debt funding, it's just prioritised debt funding. So I would suggest to you that we don't support this particular recommendation and we support D2, which is the business case to be paid for by additional debt funding, and that subsequently we can look at where that debt funding is coming from. So hope for your support to vote this one down and do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also do recognise this as a priority for this business case, and am happy to look at us funding it through the reallocation. I am opposed to increasing our debt to fund this for a number of reasons. I think our community was really clear in our LTP consultation that they did not want us to increase the debt and told us we should be living within our means. From my perspective, living within our means is within Council's approved budget for this year. The information that the Chief Executive provided us a couple of weeks back looking to next year's annual budget indicated that last year we had budgeted 9.9 million for interest, that next year it would be up to 17 million. That's an increase, 71% increase in the interest because of the rapid rate of our debt increasing. Now, if the Mayor was here, he'd probably tell us all that there's other cities in New Zealand that have much bigger debt, and he's correct on that. But the other thing that he probably wouldn't be mentioning is that those cities have a much bigger population base to support the funding that debt. We are a small city. Our debt is increasing at a much more rapid pace than what our community is saying to us that it can afford. So for that reason, I'm much more in favour of reallocating the local share funding, which we're needing to shuffle around. Councillor Johnson's report indicated that we'd be moving budget around through our report process anyway. So that is more in this relation we're definitely going to be supporting.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly support this. I certainly support business. I support freight. I support this council doing things that will increase wealth. And I think we've been down the cycling road. We need to try something different. And you can't bring freight to the Manawatu on a bicycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bowen.
First, a question, if I could, Madam Chair. I'm interested in what Councillor Johnson is driving at, and I wonder if there's a way of in an alternative recommendation capturing that? If there's a thought from the Chief Executive as to what wording might look like, that instead of additional debt funding, it's a reallocation of agreed funding? No, not reallocating council's local share, reallocating the debt funding envelope. Is that something we can look at as an alternative recommendation should this one fail?
Through the chair, I think that's D2, isn't it? That's the about using debt funding or.
Yeah, it says additional, and what we're talking about is reallocating within the existing debt-funded envelope. Scott is waving frantically, Wade.
Yeah, I can feel the wind on the
Kia ora, yes. Scott, thank you.
If I could maybe help out the Chief Executive here, we could reallocate part of the local share debt fund from transport to this. Is that sort of heading in regards to not additional debt, but reallocating the debt-funded local share and turn it from capital new into operational to do the business case.
And would you need a change of wording in the alternative recommendation to achieve that?
Yes.
Okay, so Councillor Johnson will work on that. Thank you. Right, having established that, my comment is probably to follow Councillor Arnott. I am in favour of footpaths. I am in favour of people not falling over and smashing their faces on our footpaths. I think $100,000 goes a long way to helping people walk safely on our footpaths, and it seems to me to be hugely unfair to take budget away from footpaths in order to achieve the future goal, which I do support, of getting the big trucks, the B trains, off our city streets. Those two things are not connected. Trucks on our roads is nothing to do with our footpath or active transport activity class. So to me, these two things should not be brought into the same conversation. It is unfair to take this money from the footpath budget, and so I won't support reallocating council's local share of footpath funding to deliver a business case which delivers zero benefits for our footpath using community. But I will support the alternative with some different wording. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison, a right reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I say this debate on this item has been a little bit like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And but speaking to this recommendation specifically, and taking the philosophy of debt and just how much we just keep creeping into our debt. And I want to raise the point or the principle about robbing Peter to pay Paul. If we don't reallocate and we start going back into debt again for this decision and future other decisions, it's like robbing our future. It's robbing our people of our future of options and choices and burdening them with the reservicing of this debt. It does not come for free. And so that really has been the premise of around supporting some of the recommendations here today. I am sympathetic around the timing, and I get there's other needs. We would have reprioritised our decisions when it was at the LTP. But until we get to a wider view, like has been referenced a couple of times now at our finance quarterly report, to actually have a more holistic view on this, I think that's where we're probably going to get the best gains. But the short-term solution, just to keep funding this on debt, it just doesn't sit well with me, knowing that our plan is already loaded with a lot of commitment around the debt commitments we've indicated to date. So my position's unchanged, and still would again ask you to consider that who we're robbing from. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dennison. So very short, we'll be voting on this recommendation that Council deliver the Manawatu Regional Freight Ring Road business case by reallocating Council's local share funding in 2024 and 25. I ask that you please vote accordingly. Thank you. And that has failed, 7-6. Councillor Johnson, you have an alternative? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will then move D2, but with a change in wording that I've just emailed to the administrator. So hopefully that's been received. By reallocating, no, that's not right. Okay, so my wording is the council cover the deliver the Manawatu Regional Freight Ring Road business case by reallocation of transport debt of $100,000 of transport debt funding. That's what it should say.
And we have a seconder with councillor Bowen.
No, so the local share. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, so
Councillor Bowen seconds it.
So we've heard from the officers that this can be done by reallocating the debt that was already budgeted but will not be used in the local share funding. So I'm hopeful that this will enable us to deliver the business case, but not to further hamstring the pavements. So I'm hopeful that you'll all support this. I think we all agree the business case is worthy and needs to be done. And doing the business case may unlock further funding, co-funding for us. This is not any additional debt funding, okay? I'm just going to say that again for the benefit of maybe those that don't feel that I speak clearly. This is not any additional debt funding. This is a reprioritisation of debt that we had already budgeted for and the community had already been consulted on.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Zabellin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just had a question for the officers, if I may. I neglected to ask this earlier. Looking at the Regional Freight Road, Ring Road indicative business case, it says in the long-term plan we've budgeted $500,000 for year one, and the amount there is $100,000. Am I looking at the right line item, or is that number incorrect?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, you are looking at the line item. When the budgets were put together, that was the initial phasing. Now we've rephased, and that's the amount of money we'll need in year one to get the business case going.
Thank you for that, Glenn.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a question for the Chief Executive. Are you comfortable with this recommendation?
I feel very comfortable every day.
With,
yes,
with this recommendation?
Yeah, I am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Wade, always working for us. Councillor Johnson has covered all of the reasoning behind this. I just wanted to stand to say, I hope this strong vote in support of this signals our strong support, continuing support for this #1 priority project of the Manawatu Regional Freight Ring Road. We all continue to be hugely disappointed with the funding allocation that's landed against our ring road. We've prioritised this strongly. We understand well the business case that we're driving through it. This isn't just about Palmerston North. This is a regional project. It will have ongoing economic benefits for our community, for our region, for the country, actually. So in delivering our personal commitment to pursuing this business case, I hope that sends a strong message to our local members of Parliament and to the government that this continues to be our highest priority project, and we think it is well deserving of national funding.
Tēnā koe. Thank you, councillor. And any further comments? Right of reply? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. No right of reply, so I ask that we are ready to vote on this. Thank you. That council delivered the Manawatu Regional Freight Ring Road business case by reallocation of $100,000 transport debt funding. Thank you. And that has passed 13 By 13 votes, thank you. We move on to E. And I have a alternative by Councillor Naylor that I'm going to allow to be put forward. Councillor Naylor.
The E covers the emissions, which is an unfortunate situation that we are faced with, where there have been some items that have been missed when we've been doing our consultation process. In a consistent way with the previous two items, where we've agreed that we will progress in a way that's within that overall funding envelope that has been approved for year one. The alternate recommendation that I'm suggesting is that the CE provide options to reprioritise operational and capital and renewal budgets to keep within the approved budget for year one of the LTP. I would expect that that information could come back through that November report, but what this is asking is, rather than adding to the debt for these items that have been omitted, we look at what we've approved overall and we reprioritise to live within our means to as our community has asked. And that is, my expectations around that would be the most important things get funded and the things that perhaps are less important can drop off. So I'd urge you to support that for similar, I'm not going to repeat myself around the impact of debt to our community, but for similar reasons to what I've outlined in the previous item.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I first saw the headlines coming out around the new transport planning, and when I started to see some of the correspondence, when I started to see some of the budget lines, I thought, man, it can't get any worse than this. But I'd like to thank Councillor Naylor for proving me wrong. This would make it even worse. What we actually need, because we're already a full quarter into this year with question marks all over the place, we need to start backing some budgets so that we don't just see things starting to fall apart and going backwards. So my hope is that we're here today to start to give some signals. This is wide open, provide options. That means we could get to November, December, February with zero, or still kicking the political football around how much we're actually going to put into essential programs that unfortunately were missed from our initial go. This is like an LTP speed round. It's not easy, it's not necessarily fun, but we need to make some concrete decisions today that actually give direction. So I'd indicate that I'll be voting against this particular one because it is just kicking the can down the road. And I would suggest that we should move to E1, which I would be happy to move should this fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to support the recommendations before us, and it's really off a theme of how I've been advocating around the reprioritisation of our existing budgets. And there's several reasons. It is unfortunate, the omissions. I take the point. They are important programs. They're core services, and programs like line marking have a high safety component to it. So I'm not saying don't do them. I'm saying let's do them. But let's reprioritise the budget that we've got allocated across the board on this activity and have that information come back to us in November and put the stress test to that and then review that information at the time. Rather than just giving more and more flex of debt that seems to be provided in this item today at pretty sizable amounts because when you take into the fact that if we're going to start doing, can I just use the example of doing the 5 dips and the other Stony Creek Road works, that additional allocation needs to be followed through onto year 2 and 3, which again is unfunded. Why do a year one project when we're not going to follow through on year 2 and 3 as a priority? And so when we're looking at a 3-year snapshot and working out our financial capacity, I just think it's at some point we've got to reprioritise our existing budgets, whether it's transport or the general overview of our total long-term plan. And so that's the ethos that I'm taking here on position on this, and urge you to really deeply consider where the debt's coming from and who's going to serve it into the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, I'm not going to be supporting this. I'll indicate that if this fails, I'll second Councillor Barrett's option of E1. I think we need to understand that council staff need the money to be able to deliver on these budgets. We're talking about year one. We're not talking about further years. Yes, it's unfortunate that these things were missed out of the budget, but let's just imagine if they had been in the budget, would we have said no to them? See, I don't think we would. So, given that, what I would suggest is that we that we support E1, which does, yes, at this stage, involve additional debt. But we can look at the debt across the whole budget the next time we look at the quarterly financial report and reprioritise from the whole budget. What I don't want to do is reprioritise within the transport budget, which is already under huge strain. I mean, we're talking a figure that is not possible to be saved from one budget in council. It may be able to be reprioritised across the whole council, but I don't think that this is providing staff with enough funding and resourcing to be able to do the tasks that we need them to do. So I would please ask that you do not support this one and that you support E1, which will today indicate that we want to support these important safety and other programmes. And secondly, although we're approving additional debt funding today, it doesn't mean that we can't then reallocate on. And if it's helpful, I'm happy to move an additional recommendation with that, if that passes, to say that the next quarterly financial report that we look at reprioritising debt from other parts of the whole budget, not just transport. So, yep, please don't support this. It's short-sighted and it will result in significant reductions in level of service in the transport budget for the community.
Kia ora. Councillor Naylor is coming in just for clarification.
This is just a point of clarification, just given the comments that Councillor Johnson has made. This recommendation does not specify transport budgets. It says reprioritise operational and renewal budgets to keep within the approved budget for year one. So this is in actual fact delivering what Councillor Johnson has just indicated she would suggest as a backup. Sorry, I'm getting shaken heads.
Thank you. No debate on that, thank you. From any further comment from Councillor Johnson? Thank you, Councillor Naylor, for that clarification. Yes.
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair. My comments related to what I think Councillor Dennison said, that this was to be reprioritised from within the transport budget.
Mike's right.
And
I'm happy to respond. I did say that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And if that's what you wanted to clarify, I did say
it
that.
Is. So my understanding when I spoke was that this was coming from the transport budget because that's what Councillor Dennison said. So if it's not coming just from the transport budget, that needs to be clarified by the mover and seconder, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take the... Sorry, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in response, I'm happy to take the wider view of the intent of what the mover has indicated of the wider operational and renew budgets being reprioritised.
Thank you. That's enough for the moment, Council. Councillor Bowen.
Gosh, okay. So, where I land with this is in the officer's comments, and in the report, the officer talks about how these omissions are deeply unfortunate because they're high priority pieces of work. In the response to questions, the officer indicated that it would be incredibly helpful if we could provide some specificity around our prioritisation. And to me, this recommendation doesn't do that, and the alternative, as suggested, does. The alternative specifies that the omissions are not just high priority to the officers, but also high priority to elected members, and that would then inform the report that comes back in November. So to my way of thinking, this doesn't deliver what the officers have asked us for. The alternative does, and I'll be supporting the alternative for that reason. And also because I like this reprioritisation of debt conversation that we're having, that this isn't additional debt, it's debt that we've already consulted our community on, and we're reprioritising based on the change in funding programme. So, no to this one, yes to the alternative. I hope that's clear.
Thank you. Many thanks, Councillor. Councillor Naylor, you have a right of reply.
Yes, I do have a right of reply. I'm a little bit confused, to be quite honest, Madam Chair. The arguments that I've heard appear to be very consistent with the intent of this recommendation. The intent of this recommendation is to say no to additional debt, but to say yes to reprioritising. And this would ask for those options to come back to us, either in a quarterly report or the November report, whatever's convenient to staff. I'm unsure of how that is different to the alternative, so if someone can enlighten me, that would be great. But otherwise, I would urge you to support this. This is saying no to an additional 1.7 million debt. This is saying, yes, let's operate within the allocation that we've approved for year one of our LTP. This is saying, whatever that might look like, we will need to be specific about those options. Will come back to us so that we can be specific. I do hope that makes sense, and I do urge you to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor, and there'll be no further because you have a right of reply. We are going to vote on this, that the Chief Executive provide options to reprioritise operational and renewal budgets to keep within the approved budget for year one of the LTP. Can I please ask you vote on this? Thank you. And that has failed 8 against and 5 for. Councillor Barrett, I believe you have an alternative? Oh, Councillor Johnson, thank you. Oh, no, sorry, I've been advised it was Councillor Barrett. Thank you. Councillor Barrett, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you in particular for that last vote. I would have been shocked to see us take a vote that would have opened up the entire LTP to a question of reallocation of investment. I think if you ever want to throw a spanner in the works of a council organization in October, you just rip the lid off the LTP and say it's all up for debate. So thank goodness we dodged that particular bullet. And we're now in a position to actually have a conversation, as has been repeatedly signaled, about reallocation of the existing debt profile that was established in consultation with the community through the LTP and was thankfully carried through a strong majority vote through this chamber. So I would urge you to support this so that we have clarity for our team about ensuring that our streets are well lit, ensuring that our line marking is safe, ensuring that our blocked drains are not blocked drains so we don't have all those complaints coming in autumn around leaves and everything else. Like, this is just the basics. Yes, some people have called it the groceries. When you're starving, they're important, so we need to vote for it. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I think when you look at people's home situation, when they've got a limited budget and something comes along that was unexpected, they have to reshuffle and they have to pull back on perhaps some of the less important things. And it's not usually the groceries, it's usually other things that drop off, because obviously the groceries is very important. This recommendation, as I read it, does add 1.7 million to the debt, if I'm reading it correctly. If someone is understanding that differently, please feel free to point that out. This simply just adds to the debt to address the issues that have been put in front of us. So I won't be supporting this. I think we absolutely have to learn to live within our means. That is what our community has asked us. And I think we need to do that through reprioritising. So I won't be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bowen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. I am absolutely pointing this out. It is not additional debt funding of 1.7 million. It's a reallocation of debt funding within our existing consulted on debt profile. It's not additional debt at all. It's not. It's debt that we've consulted on already. So that would be wrong to go to the community and say we've voted to increase debt. We haven't. We've voted to allocate debt. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson?
I just think it's important that we understand that what we're talking about here is things that we would have definitely agreed to had they been in the budget at the time that we were debating it. So we're not talking about optional extras. We're not talking about nice to haves. We're talking about basics that through human error were missed out of the budget. And this is an opportunity to get them back in. So to me, it just seems plain and simple that if we want to continue with the grocery analogy, if you're doing a grocery shopping list and you forget the bread and milk, you're going to go back and get them. Okay, so, seems simple enough to me.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett, right of reply? No right of reply. Therefore, we will be voting on Council cover the omissions identified in Attachment 1 by reallocating the Council's local share funding as outlined in Table 2 and debt funding the remaining operational and renewal omissions of circa 1.7 million as shown in Table 2. Can I please ask that we vote now? Thank you. And that has passed 10-3. Thank you. And now we're coming back to the substantive, which includes all of the above. I think we'll be looking forward to this final one. I know I will be. That the Chief Executive investigate financial modelling service levels and any other potential consequences of the above and report back to Council on the 6th of November 2024, finalisation of Year 1, 2024 to 25 decisions, and to refer proposals to the Year 2 for 2025-26 and Year 3, 2026 to 27 annual plan processes. Councillor Johnson. Thank you. Oh, we need a mover for that. Are you moving there, Councillor Johnson? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Second by Councillor Bowen. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Just a quick question about where it says any other potential consequences of the above. I mean, when this comes out, it's actually going to be the following, not the above. So we just need to make sure that because it's A to E, they sit under 1, not above 1. So just pointing that out.
Oh, yes, Hannah, thank you. Our Governance Manager.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. What we're going to do with these is when we write the minutes, it'll be in a very similar format to how we debate the annual budgets. Okay. So this will actually be the catch-all at the bottom of the minutes. That's why we've rephrased it as above rather than what you had in your papers.
Okay. Thank you. Look, I'm happy to move this to the catch-all, and just to make some general comments, I think, you know, and thank you, colleagues, for your patience. It's been quite a challenging morning, I would say. But we're in this situation through a couple of things that have happened that are outside of our control. And so what is within our control is to respond to those things. And I think through the different recommendations that have been passed that we've responded in the best way possible. We're not in a great position or situation. I think we all understand that. But we've done what we can to protect essential services for the community and to make sure that we prioritise projects that we're consulted on, and that as far as possible that we don't increase debt for the community as a result. And I would say no thanks to the government over this, quite honestly, because the allocation of funds to NZTA and the priority of spending has meant that many councils across the country, including our own, have missed out on significant co-funding. And in one sense, it galls me to have to make up the shortfall ourselves to kind of cover up for the government's prioritising away from local prioritising and into roads of national significance, none of which, I might point out, are in our area. So it does gall me that we're kind of making up the shortfall. But nevertheless, you know, when I was elected to do the best for my community. And that's what I continue to do. Although I must admit there's a part of me that feels like saying, well, if government doesn't want to fund it, we won't do it. But actually, the reality is people in this community are relying on us to make sensible and fair decisions, to carry through on the things that we said we would do, and as far as possible to protect the standards of delivery and service that we've agreed with them. And I think that we've quite reasonably managed to do that through this process this morning. So thank you all for your input. It's not been easy, but I think we've come out in a good place.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, colleagues. None of us wanted to be in this situation, and I think we've done the best we can with, a really bad job, as Councillor Johnson said earlier. I just wanted to reflect that this isn't on us. Well, there were some fortunate omissions in there which were down to human error. That happens in all large organisations. But in the bigger scheme of things, none of this is on us. Every council around the country is going through a similar difficult process at the moment. We know there are process problems in how council LTPs line up the NZ funding round. That has always caused us issues. Yeah, that is a known issue. We knew it in the LTP, as we've known it in every LTP that I've been part of, that there could be a mismatch between what we've taken to the community and what NZTA come back with. We have never experienced a mismatch like this. This is unprecedented territory for all of us. And in that, I probably had a moment of reflection, as did many of you, going, was there anything we could have done? And we had conversations with our MDC colleagues yesterday, going, is there anything that we could have done with this? And my reflection was that part of this is to do with the significant changes between the draft GPS and the final GPS. We made the best decisions we could based on the information we had when the draft government policy statement came out. Our officers advised us on that basis. What we couldn't have known, what they couldn't have known, was the significant changes that would occur between the draft and final. And that is largely why we've ended up here with a significant mismatch being out of step with what the government priority for funding has been. So thank you to the officers for the huge scramble to pull this together, and more work to come. We all recognise that. Significant work to come before November as we try to unmismatch it, as we try to align what we can afford to do with the priorities that our community expressed through the consultation process for the LTP, whether that was around the amount of debt that people are prepared to live with, or with how they prioritise things like footpaths that don't injure people there's still more work to do, but we've put our shoulder to the wheel today and done the best we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I will definitely support this recommendation and will look to that financial modelling and information that comes back to us. I think that'll be really useful in us having an accurate understanding about how the decisions that we've made today does leave us. And I certainly hope that the assurance that I've been provided by my colleagues flows through in terms of what that debt looks like when that modelling comes back. In terms of reflecting on, yes, it's unfortunate that the government's changes have meant that we're faced with this situation, but in reflecting on how we've got here, I do need to also comment on the fact that the auditors did point out to us when they gave us an adverse opinion that we were overly reliant on third-party funding in our assumptions, and that is part of why we're in this position today. It may not be the only time that we're faced with this sort of dilemma or challenge where we have to revisit things in our plan because of our assumptions around third-party funding. So I'm hopeful that that's not the case, but it may be that we have to have similar conversations to this in the future. And I think that's something that we need to acknowledge and be mindful of as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Madam Chair, colleagues. Probably just briefly to respond to some of that recent comment. I've always found it incredibly comforting that we had a strong and generally stable co-investment partner in local government. To those that are particularly concerned around debt, around cost of rates, try doing transport on your own. There's a way to blow it out. So yes, we are appreciative of our external funding partners, continue to be appreciative of our external funding partners, and we hope that there's a day when we are far better along than we are today. It's very clear as the GPS, and this was a disaster for local communities, frankly. Not overstating, this was a disaster. And at 9 o'clock this morning, it was an unmitigated disaster. But I'm pleased that 3 hours later, we have started to reassemble the pieces. There is a long way to go, but I'm given some comfort by the votes, by the comments this morning, that we are prepared to rally around our community even when government fails. Particularly like to thank Glenn, his team, Scott, his team for their answers this morning. To you, the Chief Executive, thank you for rallying the team around this so that we could, in fact, do a bit of a speed round on the LTP today. Not what we planned or wanted to do, but what has been forced on us. Still a long ways to go in terms of building back, but we've made a good start today, colleagues. Thank you for your support.
Tēnā koe, Councillor. Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just echo some of those comments. I think we've had a really clear message that local infrastructure in the Manawatu is not anywhere near the top of anyone's priority list except ours. If we look at the ring roads being demoted, the speed limits, the terrible timing of all of this, drip feeding critical info to us, last minute toll surprises, the pothole van isn't even coming to the Manawatu at all. It's very clear that we don't have friends in Wellington. And to Councillor Bowen's point, I was also considering of what we could have done differently, given that, as Councillor Naylor pointed out, that we were heavily reliant on third-party funders, but those were specifically in the auditor's comments I understood to refer to our earthquake-prone strengthening program and also the wastewater treatment plant and less on roadings, which has been pointed out has been a more of a stable third party. But what could we have done differently? Probably schmoozed and pandered to cronyism, because that's how this coalition is appearing to work. So there's some pretty clear messages from the government that we're on our own. So we've got to look after our own. I think we've had a really good stab at that today, and I also want to express my thanks to the staff for rolling with these punches and presenting us with the most up-to-date information, because it's certainly changing a lot. Thank you.
Tēnā koe, Councillor Zabellan. Well, whānau, we've come to the end of that, just about, but I too want to thank the CE and the officers for their hard work, and I want to thank elected members also for your deliberation, debate and input. Can we please, oh sorry, Councillor Johnson, right of reply. Thank you. Can I now ask that we vote on the motion in front of us? Thank you. And that has passed unanimously. We will be taking a lunch break from now until we'll meet back here at 1 o'clock. But before that, I want to highlight that when we return, we'll go straight to item 10, and then we will go to 8, 9, and 11 thereafter. So if we could meet back here at 1:05, thank you.